All right, book 5 is really divided into like 3 major episodes, and we are focusing on one of those episodes. But before we launch into a review for the book 5 test, let's recap what we've seen in the De Bello Gallico up to this point. And we went a little bit out of order, so I'm going to recap in order, I think. All right. So book 1. It's great because we started with book 1, and we started it at the very beginning of book 1, and we should probably have a pretty good memorization of how book 1 of the De Bello Gallico went, right? It was the Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres, right? It was an introduction to the geography of Gaul. Like, where is this crazy place you're talking about? Romans knew where it was. I mean, that's a little bit much, but tell me more about this Gaul. And he goes from the geography of Gaul into the war with the Helvetii, right? So we learn about a lot of tribes, but they're like the first big tribe. We learn about some major players in the Helvetii, and Caesar flexing a little bit about I didn't let them cross through the territory because I'm a little bit what's the word, fearful of the Gauls, a little bit racist or just prejudiced against these Gauls. And we talked a little bit about Roman feelings in general about the Gauls and why Caesar wouldn't be alone in this fear of the Gauls and what he was playing into. But it was a war against the Helvetii, and then a little bit, right, there was at the end of it, we didn't read this part in Latin, but war with the Germans was the second half of book 1. And book 2, we totally didn't read, skipped over it entirely. And if you're wondering what book 2 is about, it's about some campaigns against the Belgae. And at the end of book 2, or at the end of year 57 BC, the Senate decrees 15 days of sacrifices in thanks for Caesar's success. He writes about these great successes against the Belgae that he experienced in 57 BC. And book 3 was really just more of the same, but it was just all of Gaul. It was campaigns all over Gaul. Way to go, Caesar. It's a little disjointed. It's not that fun to read. Anyway, book 4. We read book 4. Okay, great, we read book 4. Or we read some parts of book 4. And at the beginning of book 4 is when Caesar crosses the Rhine into Germany, and that was a major flex. The whole idea of crossing the Rhine, and not just crossing it, right, but bridging the Rhine. Caesar builds a bridge over the Rhine, and he does it in a crazy amount of time. He uses excellent technology of the day with some pile drivers and stuff, which we haven't talked a lot about their engineering assets, but it's more than just a WWE move for sure. So he's demonstrating the engineering capabilities and how amazing and disciplined and fantastic his Roman army is. So that's the first part. And then he goes to Britain, and that's the part we read in Latin, right? Was the trip to Britain after he does a little exploration in Germany, and shows the Germans what's up. He goes to Britain and only vaguely shows the Britons what's up. But based on how his writings of book 4 went, the Senate give him 20 days of sacrifices and thanks for his awesome work in Gaul. So Caesar's got some friends back home, really appreciating all the great things he's doing overseas. We skipped book 5 and went to book 6. So actually we read book 1 and book 6 together as a unit because they shared an ethnographic aspect to them. We didn't read all of book 6. The beginning of book 6 we read in English. And so I'll come back to that. What we did read was customs of the Gauls, set up just like book 1, and then also customs of the Germans we read in English, not in Latin. Again, set up like book 1. Here's how the Gauls work, and here's how the Germans work. And actually, at the end of book 6, Caesar because this was a digression. The end of book 6 is a lot like the beginning of book 6, and it's actually his pursuit of the Eburones. And you're like, wait a minute. I know who the Eburones were. They showed up in book 5 along with our boy Ambiorix, and it's in book 6, you may recall, that Caesar pursues and, like, never catches Ambiorix. So to book 5, where we are currently, it actually began with Caesar goes back to Britain. It's the second invasion of Britain, arguably slightly more successful than his first invasion of Britain. That's the first half of it. The second half of book 5 is, again, not 5, I said there's 3 parts, right? The second part of book 5 is Ambiorix's assault on Sabinus and Cotta's winter quarters, and then arguably, like, either a third part or really just continuing the second half is more attacks on other winter quarters, right? And we're about to get into that. He attacks the winter quarters of Cicero, Quintus Cicero, right? Not Marcus Tullius Cicero, though related. And we see Caesar experiencing some real setbacks here, right? Especially in this part of it. But we also see some incredible depictions of not just Caesar's, but reflections of Caesar through other people's leadership or lack thereof. So book 5 is really a lot more dynamic than the few books that come before it. And so we could look at it as 3 parts, or really we could look at it as just 2 parts. Britain, and then attacks on the various winter quarters, especially Sabinus and Cotta's and Cicero's, because that was a concerted effort, right? But it's winter, right? So once we kind of like put those attacks on the winter quarters down, we finish up that mess, we will eventually finish up that mess, then it's actually winter, right? So book 5 ends as winter has really come in 54 BC. And then in book 6, it's springtime in 53 BC. And now that winter's over, we recover from those attacks. We set to punish the Gauls that attacked us. Specifically, we're fighting the Treveri. And we remember them from book 5 as well. And then again, we're punishing the Eburones, but never actually catching Ambiorix. And somehow I'm not able to scroll. Maybe I can scroll. And then book 7, which we only read in English and didn't discuss a ton, is the culmination of it all. It's like a pan-Gallic revolution led by one of our coolest Gallic names, Vercingetorix, culminating at the final battle of Alesia in 52 BC, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 52 BC. And then it's after that Caesar's recalled, and all of Caesar's end-of-life events happen over the 8 years that follow. But Caesar's time in Gaul is summed up here. And so here we are in book 5. We didn't read the second invasion of Britain, but we are reading this Ambiorix episode, and then we'll separate it from the other winter quarter attack part of the episode. So we started with 5.24, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time recapping how to translate this section, but there are some grammar things that I want to point out and some things I want to remind you of. Also, heads up, I don't know how long this video is going to last, so it may be in 2 parts, or it may just be this one part. I want to remind you of some things that maybe we haven't seen or talked about in a while. There is a locative somewhere in book 524. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm going to tell you that it exists. So that's fun. Haven't seen one of those. Chapter 24, like a lot of chapters, like a lot of Caesar, has a lot of ablative absolutes, right? A lot of, ooh, yikes. Wow. Wrong color. Ooh. Ablative absolutes, they appear quite a bit. Well, I mean, maybe not. Maybe this isn't the heaviest hitting of ablatives, absolute. But those are worth noticing. There's also some other ablatives, lots of ablatives in here, in fact. But then there's also a lot of datives. A lot of, when we see people, we see people. Oh, not that whole thing. We should recognize that people, when they look ablative, are probably probably dative. Unless there's like a cum in front of them and not a subjunctive verb. So then we know it's actually ablative. And sometimes there's other clues, like quinto, debatable, but kikaroni, definitely dative, right? So together, definitely dative. Again, a person, definitely dative. And they're not, I got some other people in the dative, like an AEs here and there. And we had a couple of verbs here that really required those datives, and that's that we had our boy praese, to be in charge of something, right? So you can like order an accusative to be in charge of the dative, and it's a compound, like to be before the dative, and then this other compound like praeficio, praeficere, and that means like to make somebody in charge of something else. So like I can praeficio an accusative over a dative, like make somebody in charge of the dative. So like, you know, accusative and dative. This one I would leave like another verb, like I tell an accusative using a different verb to praese a dative. Here I've just got the one verb, like I put an accusative in charge of a dative. So that was a lot of that. The other thing I really want to remind, sorry, there's another special dative in here that we may or may not have talked about. And that's that mederi takes a dative, we could say it takes a dative direct object. Anytime we're not taking an accusative direct object, it's not technically a direct object, but it translates into English in the same way that a direct object would. Really, it's like, while we might say like, you know, he thought that he was able to alleviate the lack of grain, dative. Really, it's like he thought that he was able to make amends for the lack of grain. So really, it's doing what a dative does. So it's not technically a dative direct object, it's inherently requiring a dative concept. So anyway, I wanted to point that out. The other thing, and I'm quickly running out of time on this video, is that while we all know what's going on in 524, do not let the same problem affect you that happened when we first started translating Book 1. And that's that you know what it says, but you get real complacent and sloppy with the translation. And you're like, oh, Gaul, Gaul's divided into 3 parts. One part is inhabited by the Belgae, another is inhabited by the Aquitani, and even though that's true, what happens is you get complacent and you just say what you know is going on versus what the Latin literally to the letter says is going on. And it doesn't say one part is inhabited by the Belgae, right? What it says is one part, or one of which, object, the Belgae inhabit. So make sure you're really careful on these things, especially when you know what it's saying. That you're careful to be literal with your translation. Make your subject your subject. Make your verb, if it's active, make it active. So never translate an incolant as is inhabited by, right? And then don't make a nominative by the Belgae, right? Make sure you're saying the Belgae inhabit, one of which, right? So just be really careful, especially when you know what's going on. So while I could say one legion is given to Gaius Fabius to go into the Morini, right? Yes, that is what's going on. And in a different world, maybe that'd be a fine translation. But what the AP is looking for is he gave one of which, right? With an active verb. He gave one of which object to be led into the Morini. He gave it to Gaius Fabius, the legate. So just be really careful. We do get a lot of parallel structure, but then, like, the fourth one is different. We had this different punctuation. It's like he ordered a fourth one to spend the winter among the Rami with Titus Labienus, like in the confines of the Trevery. Okay, so that's all I wanted to remind you of for Book 5 as a whole and Chapter 524. Video to be continued, and it may be in 2 parts, so There we go.